Directing two different youth choirs was not what I expected it to be. Hi, I'm a music teacher, and this is my life. Welcome back to the channel, everyone, and welcome for those of you who might be new here. Last year, I was teaching vocal music in two very different contexts, but in both of them, I was a youth choir director. And so I thought in today's video, it might be fun to share with you all some of the expectations versus some of the realities that I faced. Before we get started, be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so that you never miss another video. So like I said, I was teaching vocal music to two very different youth choirs in different contexts. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information about my experience. In the first context, I was trying to lead a choir of grades 9 through 12 students at the high school where I was teaching last year. Now, one thing to note about this school is that its arts program is gradually rebuilding since the pandemic. Its visual arts program is quite strong, but in terms of music, its band program and guitar programs are slowly rebuilding. But when it comes to vocal music, there really are no vocal music courses offered during the day. So the choir was really all the school had in terms of a vocal music program. While my other context was as the junior choir director at my church. That is a choir that includes children grades 2 through 12, and we only rehearse once a week, Thursday evenings, whereas the high school choir had weekly rehearsals. It was 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at lunch. In addition to having the junior choir, we also had an intermediate choir where some of either the older high school students that may not be able to make it every Thursday, or some of our graduated students who are in university or college would come back for some special performances, for example, Christmas Eve or our end of year choir celebration, usually around the end of May or beginning of June. So the junior and intermediate choirs were both directed at a church by me. So let's start with 3 expectations and 3 realities of running a high school choir. The first expectation that I had going in was that I really thought that I'd have more information and more support for the choir. But the reality was that I had some support and some information. So coming into a new school, this was a school where I had never been either a permanent teacher or LTO before, I was expecting to have maybe some more information about the choir and maybe more support. But the reality is that while there is a great choir library at that school with lots of different music to pick from, the reality was that I had some information about how they rehearsed the previous year, but that was really it. I know that every music teacher will choose to lead their warm-ups and rehearsals a little differently, but I didn't really have any understanding of what kinds of music that they were learning the prior year. I knew that they sort of focused on maybe 1-part or 2-part harmony songs, but I didn't have a lot in terms of like whether or not they actually performed, how did they perform, and in terms of support, the funding is pretty low. As a teacher in a publicly funded school, you're really left to your own devices. It's on you for all the fundraising. I had no idea what the music budget was, or if there even was one in terms of like hiring, let's say, an accompanist, but like playing piano in rehearsal, all of those things, it's really on you as the music teacher. So I didn't really feel that supported in that position. Expectation number 2 was that I really expected for there to be consistent attendance. Part of the reason why I put the rehearsals at lunchtime was so that if there were students who either got picked up after school, had a part-time job, or other things like that, that lunchtime would work because they wouldn't have to stay late after school or show up early to school, especially since last year some of the band rehearsals were before school and it would have had some scheduling conflicts for the students. But the reality was that by the end of the school year, I had such poor attendance from many of the students that we didn't even end up being able to perform at the end of year music night. Now at that school, I can admit that one of the mistakes that I made was trying to have lunchtime rehearsals instead of after school rehearsals. Because the reality for a lot of the students at that school is that, for example, our school has a fairly high Muslim population and the prayer room is sometimes open at lunch and sometimes near the end of lunch towards the beginning of period 3, just depending on where the sun is in the sky and whether it's daylight savings time or not. So I would have one student, for example, who had great attendance, but he would only stay for about 10 minutes and then he would go and pray. And he has every right to do that. It was just very difficult to think, well, that means that he's not learning any of the repertoire that we're preparing. And had I decided to have after school rehearsals, that might have been a little bit different. The other challenge is that there are a lot of students in our school who, for example, have school provided transportation after school or sports and other things. And so I was trying to have the rehearsals at lunchtime instead of after school so that it wouldn't be a conflict for anyone who got picked up after school by school provided transportation, parents or guardians, anyone who had a part-time job. And it also wouldn't be before school because early mornings can be very difficult in terms of getting to school on time for an early rehearsal with traffic and buses. All of those things can be difficult. But unfortunately, the attendance patterns from the student just weren't consistent enough to have any real performances, and the choir ended up folding by the end of the year. And the other expectation, the last one I'll say for my high school directing, was that I thought that lunchtime rehearsals would work. And the reality was that lunchtime is also too short. So in the last expectation versus reality, I mentioned how sometimes lunch isn't always the most equitable, but also time-wise, it was very short. By the time the students got to the music room, had a little bit of food to eat, and I finished the warm-ups, we had maybe 25 minutes, 30 minutes of singing. And so we would end up singing through maybe 2 songs a day. I will say the other thing that I expected to work was for the rehearsals Monday, Wednesday, Friday to work. I think in reality, that's not the best schedule for lunchtime rehearsals because Mondays and Fridays can often have canceled rehearsals as a result of things like PD days or holiday Mondays or Fridays. So I think if I were to do lunchtime rehearsals in the future, even though I would probably advise against it, I would say stick to Tuesdays and Thursdays, maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because they're the least likely to be canceled for external factors like PD days and holidays. I'm now going to go ahead and share 2 different expectations and 2 different realities that I faced while being the junior choir director at my church for the very first time. The biggest expectation that I had was the fear that I would not be able to fill what I believed were very big shoes by the person who retired the year before I became the director. Now, as I mentioned in another video before this, the previous junior choir director was my junior choir director when I was a child in this church. And so I knew her growing up, and she had carried the legacy of the junior choir for 30 wonderful years. And she was also an elementary school teacher. So she has that gentleness and patience that it honestly requires out of an elementary school teacher when you're working with young kids. Meanwhile, I, as a high school teacher, I can be patient, but I teach a very different age group. I teach grades 9 through 12. At that point, the kids are around maybe 15 years old, 14 at the youngest, and they go up to like 17, 18. So I'm used to teaching students who are a lot older and typically more mature. The reality is, though, thankfully, I received quite a bit of positive feedback from the congregation. The kids seemed to be enjoying the choir, and the parents seemed happy. And another great thing is that the previous director, while she did retire, is still in the senior choir. And so she would regularly see the kids' performances, see me directing, and she would give me positive feedback saying that I was doing a good job. So even though I knew in the first year things wouldn't be perfect, it definitely made me feel good that I was on the right track and doing the best that I could and making her proud. The second expectation was that I thought that I was just going to make a lot of mistakes in that first year and that either the kids or the priest of the church would be unhappy and maybe need to talk to me about a few things. But the reality is that even though mistakes are a pretty normal part of your first time doing a new job, particularly in your first 3 months to first year, there were a few mistakes that I may have made, say in a rehearsal, like singing the wrong notes or singing the wrong words or maybe getting lost on what page number I was on. But overall, things went smoothly. The performances went well. And as I said, I got a lot of positive feedback from the congregation, including the priest and the parents. So the performances went well, and the end of the year speech overall went well. So I was overall happy with that result. The other thing was that there really weren't big enough mistakes for anyone on a Sunday to notice or even care. And in the rehearsals, it didn't really make that big of a difference because we were able to pick up from where we left off, reset, and we were good to go. And the last expectation and reality that I'm going to share with you actually applies to both my choir directing roles. The expectation that I had was that all of my students and singers would take the commitment that they had to the choir seriously and make it a priority in their schedule. But the reality was that choir in both contexts almost always came second to some of their other time commitments. So for example, whether it was something at school happening at lunch that, oh, I can't go to choir at lunch because I have this other thing to do. It just didn't seem like choir was as important to them. And then of course at the end of the year, some students said, okay, I'm ready to commit to choir. And I was thinking to myself, it's June, it's the end of the school year and the semester. And at this point, it's too late to teach you all of the music in time for music night. We're just not going to be able to make it. When it came to the church choir context, the kids are involved in a lot of extracurricular activities, not just choir. So whether it was music lessons, they were away for like a Kiwanis Music Festival, or like a hockey tournament, ringette, or soccer during that time of year. It just seemed like choir was always like a second or even third priority. I don't know if it's because for all of these students and families in both contexts, being a member of the choir was free as opposed to being something they had to pay money for. But I mean, to me, I see that as a good thing, that there's no financial barrier to entry for either of those choirs. But ultimately, it ended up being lower on the priority list for a lot of members in both contexts. So those are some of the expectations versus reality that I had based on my choir directing last year. Let me know in the comments if you can relate to this, if you'd like to see another expectation versus reality video. Remember to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell so that you never miss another video, and I will see you right back on this channel.